Hello, friends. I think it's no secret that Marvel Comics are one of the most popular and famous in the world. We all know who Spider-Man, Captain America, X-Men, Iron Man, and, of course, Deadpool are. We have long been accustomed to the fact that the universe is magical and bewitching. Almost every year, it pleases us with new blockbuster films about superheroes with an excellent plot and, of course, an incredible picture. But what if we delve a little deeper into the history of the world-famous company? Today, Marvel is not just a company that creates graphic novels, it is one of the largest aggregators of comics culture. It has its own cinematic universe, its own superheroes, and supervillains, along with stories of true friendship and vile betrayal. This entire corporation has been creating for us for more than a decade. In general, as usual, in my videos today, we will figure out where it all began, and, of course, we will trace the life path of Marvel from the very idea and the first comics to world blockbusters. Let's start with the fact that Marvel Comics was founded back in 1939 by a young publisher of pulp magazines, Martin Fogg. It was part of a group of companies under the general name, Timely Comics. So, who is this Goodman? Let's figure it out together. The future founder of Marvel, Moses Goodman, don't laugh because that was exactly the name recorded in the census books of 1910, was born on January 18, 1908, in Brooklyn, New York. He was the eldest of 17 children of Isaac Goodman and the Griffin House of Jewish immigrants who moved to the States in the early 1890s. Actually, there is not accurate information about the entire Goodman family, but there is some data published in the New York Times on which she will rely in this video. Moses' father worked as a simple tailor at a garment factory, and the family lived extremely poorly. At school, Moses was simply called, but this nickname followed him until he graduated from school and remained with him even after. It's only in a slightly different form, because after some time, Moses successfully became Mori himself. It's also known that when he went to school at the age of 16, the young man immediately started working because he had to help his parents and contribute to the maintenance of a huge family. At the beginning of his career, he worked as a simple clerk for a Western distribution company engaged in the distribution of newspapers and magazines on the East Coast of the United States. A little later, when the company expanded the list of services provided, it began to offer editorial and advertising services to publishers, as well as printing, binding, warehousing, transportation, and foreign sales. Together with the growth of the company, Goodman himself had earned a good reputation by the age of 20 in a young and growing company. Colleagues noticed that the guy had good entrepreneurial talent, and this characteristic played a significant role in his career. In his 20s, he became not only a logistics specialist but also a top manager of the Eastern distribution. It was he who, while still a simple worker, once came to the office of a business manager and proposed some new directions that I had already voiced above. The team paid attention to his ideas, and soon they came to life. It's worth noting that Maurice, aka Moses, was genuinely talented, full of energy and ideas. Although he didn't have enough resources to quickly implement everything he had planned, he had more than enough thoughts and grandiose plans in his head. In general, the management listened to his ideas, and that's how a simple boy from a poor family became a top manager in the distribution industry. Life, as they say, was getting better, and work brought him true pleasure. Moses was already dreaming of how he would soon become a wealthy man in a new beautiful suit and perhaps even break out into society. However, fate, as usual, made its own adjustments. In October 1929, the New York stock market crashed, causing chaos throughout the American banking system, which, in turn, undermined the national economy of the United States. This event caused a massive collapse in all industries, including the advertising and publishing industry. However, as they say, the darkest hour is just before dawn, and so it was in this story. One of the few genres of printing that continued to bring profit to publishers were magazines, specifically inexpensive and multi-page publications in which sensational, scandalous, and sentimental stories were published, providing thrills and topics for discussion. Among the first to recognize this trend was Maurice Goodman. In the summer of 1932, Maurice left his job at Western Distribution and began using the pseudonym Martin Goodman, by which he would be remembered by all future generations of publishers. Over the course of several years, he gradually established his own publishing house, thanks to established connections in the industry in his previous work. Goodman was able to assemble a small team of like-minded individuals. At the same time, Goodman, in partnership with Louis Seberg Light, became a co-founder of several ventures, trying to capture this new market. Most biographers believe that his marriage also played a significant role in the development of his business. On December 30, 1934, Goodman married the daughter of a wealthy entrepreneur and owner of a large company involved in the production of paper bottles, Atlantic Container Corporation, and Ginny Toys. Upon returning from an almost month-long honeymoon in the Bahamas, magazine distributor created by Goodman with his husband declared bankruptcy. Observers from the New York Times believed that this was a cleverly thought-out move aimed at avoiding financial liability to a business partner due to an unfulfilled contract for services. Regardless, the entrepreneur quickly directed all his strength and capabilities to create a new publishing house called Martin Goodman Publications. The journey began with tabloid magazines featuring detectives, adventures, and science fiction, which were immensely popular. However, the comic book about Superman created by DC Comics overshadowed all others in popularity, leaving other publishing companies lagging behind. This wild popularity did not escape Goodman's notice, and he decided to follow in the footsteps of his competitors by creating his own comic book production. The publishing house began its journey by releasing the first comic book about mutant superheroes, which they called Marvel Comics. The main character in it was the Human Torch, a member of the Fantastic Four, and his rival was Namor the Submariner, the son of a sea captain and princess of the mythical underwater kingdom of Atlantis. No one could have imagined that the comic would fly off the bookshelves like hotcakes, but that's exactly what happened. The publishing house even had to borrow money to print more copies for sales. In those times without television and the internet, comics were like a breath of fresh air. Interestingly, the first issues of Marvel Comics were produced by a third-party company. Goodman signed a contract with Lloyd's company, Jackie Fannis Young, to provide material for the first comic magazine. Thus, the Human Torch, created by the artist Carl Burgos, and Namor were born. The idea itself belonged exclusively to Goodman. But officially, the rights to the Human Torch and Namor were owned by a different company. However, towards the end of 1940, we decided to purchase the characters and start hiring our own writers and artists. Besides, Maurice himself perfectly understood that he still had a lot of ideas and future superheroes in his head. The next of them was the one who lived up to our time. With the beginning of World War II and in response to the threats of aggressors against the United States, a new superhero emerged, named Captain America. This character was carefully thought out in his very image, encompassing not only patriotic ideology but, first of all, the fighting spirit of all Americans who valued the defense of their homeland above their own interests. During this period, a new face appeared in the company, the 17-year-old nephew of Goodman's wife, Stanley Martin Guyber. Everyone was sure that Stanley got into timely comics thanks to family connections, but he himself refuted this version of his own employment and claimed that he got the job almost by accident after seeing an advertisement in the newspaper. One way or another, he was certainly the youngest employee at the publishing house. In the beginning, he was trusted only to fill inkwells, but soon he transitioned to working on comics. In 1941, he wrote the first lines for the May issue of Captain America, after which he became the acting editor. The first thing the young man did was shorten his name to the pseudonym Stan Lee. But more about that a little later. For now, let's return to Captain America. The latter became so popular in the United States that in 1944, the image of this hero from the printed version even made it to the screen. Although the screen Captain America had little in common with the patriotic character created in wartime, only the costume, without a doubt, this hero was familiar to everyone and therefore increased interest in the film was already ensured in advance. However, the hype did not last long because after the victory over Nazi Germany, there was a sharp decline in the popularity of this hero. People were just tired of the war, they needed something else. The demand for Morris's comics fell instantly. Something urgently needed to be done, and to keep the company afloat, Goodman even changed his style and released a mouse. They focused on more drawn adventures, romantic stories, and even science fiction. All the early superheroes created went into standby mode and gathered dust on the shelves for several years. The publishing house and America itself needed something new. It was during this period that stories such as The World of Fantasy, Disturbing Stories, Amazing Worlds, and a series of comics written specifically for girls came out. However, such stories were especially popular. They enjoyed the tales, and even if they still did not have a large circle of admirers, it wasn't enough to stay afloat. To say that from the end of the war until 1960, our hero received some kind of super profits. The tabloid press printed on and, in general, was not particularly noticeable from hundreds of similar companies. There, it was already difficult to stay in trends because, by the beginning of 1960, the generation that still remembered the war had already grown up. They were replaced by peaceful youth and students who realized that this was the ideal time for a reboot and revival of superheroes that had already been forgotten and were lurking on the shelves. Stan Lee also decided not to be left behind and to contribute to the development of the company. Thus, through joint efforts, Marvel launched its first comic book about the Fantastic Four, superheroes endowed not only with superpowers but also with immortality. The main idea of this story was that at the center of the plot were ordinary people who lived regular lives like you and me. They quarreled, made up, fell in love, studied, and in their free time, they saved the world from evil and scoundrels. This made the readers feel closer to these characters and empathize with them more strongly. The comics featuring the new four superheroes appeared on store shelves in 1960 and revived the former glory of this genre. This, in turn, helped Marvel Comics recover from its protracted downtime. Riding the wave of success, they needed to support it with new items. Behind the Fantastic Four, new mutant superheroes emerged, created through various scientific experiments involving genetic engineering or radiation. Among them were the Hulk, X-Men, and Spider-Man. Speaking of Spider-Man, the character made its first appearance in 1962. The image of this hero became one of the main symbols of youth culture. Peter Parker, the modest and downtrodden guy who, by a fateful accident, received spider genes, was even used as part of a public service advertisement dedicated to promoting drug abstinence. Marvel approached the Department of Health with this idea, and Goodman, of course, didn't refuse. Interestingly, at first, Maurice Goodman had to persuade the creator of the Spider-Man story, Stan Lee, to release this comic. He argued that children were afraid of spiders, and who knew what such an unusual plot would do to Marvel's budget. However, it was Spider-Man who became the most famous character in the history of Marvel Comics. The character was a hit and, based on the plots of all the previously mentioned comics, an incredible number of cartoons and feature films would later appear. It was thanks to Spider-Man that Stan Lee became one of the most famous people in the industry. Moses Goodman continued to own Marvel until 1968. Then, he sold most of it to a small publishing empire, making Marvel part of a subsidiary called Store Management Combo. According to some reports, the position of the head was supposed to go to Goodman's son, Charles, but the new owners of the company did not appreciate the move. Instead, the post of editor-in-chief was taken by Stan Lee, who became the publisher of Marvel Comics. Of course, it is worth noting that after the sale of Marvel, Goodman became a very wealthy man and lived for more than 20 years quietly and calmly, enjoying old age and traveling. In 1974, he founded another company, Ada's Seaport Comics, but this project lasted only a year and a half. It is not known what caused the closure, but many believe it was simply due to Morris's old age. He was no longer able to put a new project on its feet and therefore faded into obscurity. It's also worth mentioning that Maurice had 3 children with his wife Jen Davis, Iden, Charles, and Amy. In turn, his children and grandchildren continued his work and also worked in the industry. Maurice Goodman passed away on June 6, 1992, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was 83 years old, and, as he believed, he had lived a rather interesting and eventful life. Furthermore, he left a great legacy, including numerous superheroes and comics. Afterward, even with Stan Lee in the position of manager, new heroes were created. Spider-Man was replaced by Iron Man, a character unlike any of his predecessors because he didn't possess superpowers or mutation. His main weapon was exceptional intelligence and technology. Iron Man was portrayed as a glamorous arms dealer, a character that didn't fit into the anti-establishment, capitalist, or military worldview. However, his external vulnerability concealed a wounded essence, which made him an attractive and romantic hero in Marvel. In parallel, Creative teams like Stan Lee and Joe Cocker introduced new stories and even united all the heroes into one team of Avengers. A new team of superheroes with various abilities became popular in a short period, and a whole series of characters were created that continue to be popular in both comics and cinema. In 1978, the company once again saw a change in leadership, with Jimmy Shooter taking the helm. Despite his somewhat unpleasant character, Shooter's returned Marvel to its former glory. The company began to revive and set the standards higher and higher, with the new leader helping to maintain them over the next 10 years. In 1986, Marvel was bought by the New World Entertainment Corporation, and 3 years later, McAndrews and Forbes, such as Captain America, Hulk, Spider-Man, and the Fantastic Four, began to appear on screens. In fact, during most of the 90s, Marvel sold the rights to its most iconic characters, including Iron Man, Hulk, Black Panther, and the X-Men, while simultaneously increasing efforts to sell advertising for its comics and launching an aggressive licensing campaign for its products in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It was a long step that Goodman never decided to take, but opening new borders for the spread of a new culture to other continents definitely had a positive impact on the company. It's not difficult to guess that the profits from selling rare comic rights, using superheroes in toys, and collecting cards increased profits many times over. However, as often happens, the hype quickly passed, and at some point, the company began to lose millions. This was when the best artists started leaving for competing companies. Toy production in the USA became too expensive, and interest in superheroes seemingly disappeared altogether. Eventually, Marvel had to adapt to the times. Young people stopped reading comics and became more interested in films and video games. The company struggled to cope with the changing market, and it eventually declared bankruptcy. The only way to save the publishing house was through a merger with another company, and that's what happened. The transformation of Marvel from a bankrupt company into a profitable one took place during the late 1990s and early 2000s. The future didn't lie in comics but in films. The relatively few films featuring Marvel characters produced by different studios in the late 90s and early 2000s were highly successful. From 2001 to 2002, cash flow increased by more than 2 times, reaching a level not seen for almost a decade. Net profit in 2002 increased by 300%, while inventories and accounts payable decreased significantly. However, this was just the beginning of what was about to happen. In 2003, the chairman of the board of directors of Marvel, Isaac Perlmutter, and David Meisel had a historic meeting. Meisel gave them a simple but unexpected idea: why not create their own studio to independently film comic books and keep all the profits for themselves? This proposal turned out to be brilliantly simple. In 2005, Marvel's management decided to film the comic book about Iron Man on their own. Interestingly, Marvel spent a long time deciding which character to feature in their films. Initially, they planned to make a movie with Captain America, but this hero was already well known. Iron Man's films represented something new and involved many risky decisions. During the production of Iron Man, they had to secure financing, negotiate terms with banks, write a script, and hire Robert Downey Jr., who was dealing with legal issues and substance abuse problems at the time, for the leading role. All of this was very challenging and risky, but the result exceeded all expectations. The movie was released on big screens in 2008, and in just 17 days, it collected $430 million at the worldwide box office, marking an incredible success and achievement, thereby laying the foundation for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In 2009, the company was bought by Disney, and from that moment, blockbuster films began to appear, immediately captivating millions of viewers based on the plots of their comics. Nothing changed in the successful personnel composition, only their resources and distribution capabilities improved for Marvel products. The first intermediate result of the plan to unite the heroes in one film was The Avengers in the USA. The film was released in theaters on May 4, 2012, and in the first 3 days, it collected $208 million, setting a record for box office receipts in a debut weekend. In total, the film earned more than $1.5 billion, making it one of the top 5 highest-grossing films in history. Of course, it would be wrong not to share some interesting facts about Marvel. For example, few people know that Michael Jackson could have become Spider-Man in the early 90s. Michael Jackson tried to acquire the Marvel Comics publishing house, possibly to gain the rights to the Spider-Man character, produce a film with his participation, and play the main role in it. I knew Michael Jackson, and based on our discussions, it seemed to me that he wanted to be Spider-Man, a character he was in love with. He mentioned this in an interview with a publication. Another interesting fact is that the creator of Star Wars, George Lucas, was a big fan of Marvel Comics, and the source of inspiration for the image of Darth Vader he invented was Doctor Doom, the sworn enemy of the Fantastic Four and one of the Marvel characters. Yet another intriguing fact is that after the release of a comic book about zombies in 1973, Marvel trademarked the word zombie and received exclusive rights to use it in comics. It was only in 1996 that the company relinquished this right, although before that, no one else could use the word zombie in their comics. For Hulk fans, it's surprising to learn that Stan Lee initially planned to make the Hulk's skin gray. However, due to a typographical error in the first issue of the comic where this character appears, he was printed in green. There was no time to change the release dates, and the fans approved of this option. Since then, the Hulk is known throughout the world for his green skin, even though he was initially supposed to be gray. Marvel holds many unusual records, such as having shown 0 sex scenes in their comics over the past 10 years, with only a couple of modest kisses. Another record is that the movie, Avengers: Age of Ultron, only took 11 days to collect $1 billion at the box office. Mark Zuckerberg developed such a sum in a long 23 years. However, these numbers alone cannot fully indicate the greatness of Marvel. Now, the cinematic universe delights us almost every year with new films featuring incredible plots. The younger generation can't imagine life without these iconic characters. What's interesting is that today, Marvel practically monopolizes the field of superhero content. Despite being a publicly traded company that has changed ownership multiple times, Marvel still manages to retain the essence instilled in it by its creator, Moses Goodman. Each of the managers who oversaw Marvel throughout its history dedicated their best years to the company with love and devotion. They strive to maintain what a young man from a humble family of a tailor had created in his youth. Marvel is like a separate life that people want to experience over and over again. That's why billions of people around the world adore everything related to Marvel. There's so much more to say about Marvel that if I were to cover it all, the video would last several hours. I've tried to include the most interesting aspects. I hope you've grasped the main message, that overcoming the difficult begins with the easy, and achieving greatness starts with the small. In the world, the difficult is formed from the easy, and the great from the small. I believe Lao Tzu knew what he was talking about. In general, please share your opinions about what you've heard and your attitude towards Marvel. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please like it and see you soon.